Hey guys, how you going? In this video I'm going to show you how to export an HTML table to a CSV file using plain JavaScript. So this here is the final result. We have an HTML table. If I press on the export to CSV button, it's going to download automatically a CSV file containing the table's contents, and I can open it in any CSV viewer and it's going to work just fine. So we even handle things like double quotes and commas, which can be a challenge when exporting to CSV because commas are obviously the delimiter for CSV files. We also support the option to include headers or to not include headers. So that is the final result. Just a quick disclaimer, this won't be supported in Internet Explorer. The reason for that is because I'm going to be using things like classes and a few newer JavaScript features, but you can quite easily modify this code to support Internet Explorer. So let's go inside this tab right here. It contains the same HTML without the export to CSV functionality. So let's go inside the text editor and begin work on the JavaScript. But first, let's take a look at what we have going on. So I've got here obviously just the HTML table with the table header row, and also all of the data rows inside here. It's also got an ID of data table, and I've got the button down here, export to CSV, with an ID of btn export to CSV. So to begin, let's create a new directory called JS to store all of the JavaScript. We can make a new file inside here, and it's going to be called table csv exporter.js, and basically this will be a class responsible for doing the entire CSV exporting process. So essentially the index file is going to be creating a new instance of the table CSV exporter, and then from there we're going to pass in the actual table itself, and then we can call a method on the table CSV exporter to of course export or convert the table to a CSV file. So let's go ahead here and write out class. We can say class table CSV exporter, and we can just start off by declaring all of the methods including the constructor. So we can say constructor right here. We're going to take in the table element itself and also an optional parameter to include headers. So by default we are going to include headers in the CSV output. Okay, so the main method is going to be called convert to CSV, and this one is going to essentially do the main work for converting to CSV, and this will take in no arguments because we're going to have access to the table through the constructor, which will set as an instance property or instance variable. So that's that one. We can make one more, or the second last one here. It's going to be called find longest row length, and this will be considered to be a private method due to the underscore. Obviously in JavaScript you can't actually make proper private methods, but you can put an underscore, and that's just a naming convention to signify it's going to be a private method. And this one is going to essentially tell us the longest row length, which basically means if we go back inside the example, the longest row length for this table is going to be 4, as we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is the most amount of columns inside a single row. So if I was to go inside here and add a second table, or sorry, a fifth table data element, we now have 5. So in this case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the longest row length for this table is going to be 5. And the reason why we actually need this number is because when you're exporting to CSV, you need to basically make up for the longest row length even if some of your rows don't have the maximum length. So I'll just show you an example real quickly here. So back inside this file, if I was to add once again the extra column, so I'll just go inside here and add that fifth one once again, and then I can go inside here and actually export it. So I'll just say new table CSV exporter. I'm going to pass in the data table just here. I'm going to say convert to CSV. So this is what the final product will look like if I press enter here, this is the output, right? So we can see here that for the row with the fifth column, we can see that it does not have a comma, whereas these ones do. So these ones with 4 columns are going to have an extra fifth comma to make up for the extra row, or sorry, column inside this third one. So that's why we need to know what the longest row length is. Okay, so the fourth and final method is going to be a static method, and it's going to be called parseCell. It's going to take in a table cell. And the reason why it's a static method is because we don't need an instance of the table CSV exporter to parse a cell. And parsing a cell basically means taking the text content of a table cell and then making it valid CSV. So this will be dealing with all of the stuff like double quotes, commas, and line breaks to produce a valid CSV value. Okay, so basically it's going to be applying the rules of a CSV file. So let's begin all of this stuff right now by going inside the constructor, and we can begin to implement this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to keep a reference to the table itself. So we're going to say this.table is equal to the table being passed in, and this is going to be an HTML table element. Okay. And secondly, we're going to keep a reference to all of the rows inside the table. So we can say this.rows is equal to array.from, and we can say table.querySelector all, and we can pass in here tr. So basically, it's going to be an array of all of the table row elements inside the table. So I can just go down here, I can console.log this, and then go inside the index file, and I can include the class js/export to CSV, table CSV exporter .js, and I can go down here now and get a reference to the table. So I can say const data table is equal to document.getElementById, if I can spell it correctly. So get element by ID, pass in here data table. And then I can say new table CSV exporter and pass in the data table to run the constructor. Now remember, I'm not going to be passing in a second argument here because we have true by default for the include header. So I can save this and refresh the browser, check the console, and we have here a table CSV exporter. If I was to expand this, we get here all of the 4 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course the actual data table itself. So we can now work on the include headers parameter. So basically we are going to be removing the first row if we choose to not include the headers. So we're going to say here, if we wish to not include the headers and we actually have a table header row, and this can be done with this.rows at index 0 query selector all th.length. So basically, if the length of this query selector is more than 1, and that means obviously if we actually have a th element inside the first table row, then we can remove the first row. So we can say this.rows.shift, and the shift method on the array is going to remove the first element. So I can save this, go inside this file and pass in false as the second argument, and now we should only see 3 rows inside the console if I was to actually log out this. So I can save this, refresh the browser once again, and now we only get 3 rows. We have 1, 2, 3, and they are all the data rows. So that is the constructor fully implemented. We can get rid of this, and now we can work on the find longest row length method. So this one is going to simply run a reduce on the array, on the rows array. So we can say return this.rows. We're going to reduce. We're going to have here the longest length here, then a row, and we're going to say for each row, if the row child element count is greater than the current longest row length, then we are going to set the new row length to be row.childElementCount. Otherwise, we're going to use L. And the default value here is going to be 0. So basically, the reduce method is going to take the array and reduce it to a single value. In this case, we have for each row, just check the current child element count. It's basically going to tell us how many table data table data elements are inside the table row. If that is more than the current longest length, then we can set that as the current longest row length. Otherwise, we can use the existing one and a default value of 0. For more info on the reduce method, I have a whole video covering that method right there on arrays. So that is the find longest row length method implemented. So I might just go inside the constructor real quickly and just console.log here the return value of the find longest row length method, so you can see what's happening. So I can save this and refresh the browser, and we get here 4. Of course, if I was to go inside the HTML and add a 5th column or even a 6th column to this, I can save this and refresh, and now it is 6. So that's how the find longest row length method works. I can get rid of this stuff right there and go back inside here, and now we can work on the parse cell method. So as I said, this one's basically gonna be implementing all of the rules of a CSV file. So we're gonna start here by saying let parsed value equal to table cell dot text content, and we can go down here now. So we're going to default the parsed value to be the text content of the cell. And now down here we can replace all of the double quotes with 2 double quotes. So we can say here, replace all double quotes with 2 double quotes. So with CSV files, if you have a double quote as one of your values, then you need to replace that double quote with 2 double quotes. And that's just how double quotes are read in a CSV file format. So we can say here, parsed value is equal to parsed value dot replace. We're going to replace every instance of a double quote, and make sure you use the G flag for the regular expression, and that will obviously replace all of the occurrences of the double quote. We're going to replace all of those with, of course, the 2 double quotes. So that does that job right there. And secondly here, basically if your CSV value contains either a comma, a new line, or a double quote, you need to wrap the entire column in a double quote, so in double quotes. So basically we're going to say here, if value contains comma, new line, or double quotes, then enclosed in double quotes. I hope that makes sense. It's just basically following the rules of a CSV file so it can be read correctly without having any issues. So we can go down here, we can say parsed value is equal to, we're going to test here. We're going to test and watch out for a double quote, a comma, or a new line character. And we're going to say dot test here. We're going to test the current parsed value. If it contains any of these values, we're going to set the new parsed value to be double quotes, and then we can pass in here parsed value. Otherwise, if it's all good, we just want to keep the current parsed value without the double quotes surrounding it. And then we can return the parsed value. And all this stuff right here is just to ensure we produce valid CSV. So now we have these 2 methods done. I might just, once again, similar to this one, I'm going to go inside the index file and actually call the parse cell method to, actually demonstrate what's happening. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to say console.log. I'm going to log out table CSV exporter dot parse cell. And I might need to actually, for demonstration purposes, I might need to just get rid of this text content and just say parse value equals the value I pass in, just to demonstrate this. So now I'm going to go back inside here and say parse cell. I'm going to type in here, let's just say DOM and then a comma. I can save this and refresh, and we have this right here. So we can see that the return value has put double quotes around the text because I've got obviously that comma. So if I was to say this once again and say parse cell and now pass in DOM without the comma, this time it produces just the value without double quotes. I know this example isn't too good because obviously the console is adding in double quotes, but I might go back inside here and just write that out without, just like that. Save this, refresh once again, and now we get DOM here with no double quotes. So we can also test the actual double quotes. So putting a double quote right there, saving this and refreshing, and we now get the two double quotes and then the whole thing surrounded in double quotes. So that is the parse cell method working correctly. So now we can go ahead and implement the main public method, and that one is going to be, of course, the convert to CSV. So the way it's going to work is we're basically going to be looping through each row inside the rows instance variable, and then we're going to be setting we're going to be creating a string for each row and then appending that to an array of lines, and then at the end we're going to combine all of those lines with a line break, and that will be a whole CSV file. So we can say here const lines is equal to an empty array. We can also say const num cols is equal to this dot find longest row length, and then we can simply loop through all of the rows. So we can say for const row for const row of this dot rows. So for each row we're going to set a string variable right there called line, and then we can basically loop through as many times as number of cols. Remember, we need to have each number of columns, or the maximum amount of columns dealt with for every row, regardless of the actual length. So once again, I'm going to go inside here and just add an extra column for a better example. Let's copy this, paste it down here. Then once again, running this method, we can see now we get two double quotes. We have 2 commas. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commas, even with empty values. So that is basically how we're going to be dealing with every single column based on the maximum column length of the maximum or longest row. Okay, hope that makes sense. Let's go back inside here now and go inside the text editor and begin this work. So we're going to say for let I equal 0, I less than num cols, I plus plus. Okay, so in this case it's going to be 4, so 4 times. We're going to say if row.children at index I does not equal undefined. So this right here is basically checking, do we have a value at this index? So children is going to be like a list of table data cells. Obviously all of these guys right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we actually have a table cell at this index, remember if you have, in this case, we have 6. If you get to the 4th one here, the 5th index is going to be undefined. So we're going to check if we actually have a cell at this index. Then we can say line plus equals, we can append to the line string. We can say table CSV exporter dot parse cell. We're going to pass in here row.children at index I. And of course, I forgot to actually change this back to be text content. So let's put this back. And yeah, so that is that one all done. In all cases, we are going to append a comma if we are not at the last column. So we can say line plus equals, we're going to say if I does not equal num cols minus 1. So basically, if we are at the last column in the loop, then we can, if we are not at the last column in the loop, we can append a comma. Otherwise, don't append a comma if you're at the last column or index. And finally, we can say lines.push, and we can add the line to the lines array, and then we can simply return lines.join. I'm going to pass in here a line break. So that is the entire convert to CSV function done. And as you can see here, this is basically going to it's going to be producing for you a string of basically CSV. So now we can use this method. Let's go back inside the index file and actually just say .convert to CSV, and we can console.log this return value. I can save this and refresh, and we have this result right here. We have the CSV file working all nice. We can see here for things like Jeff the champion Foster, we have the double quotes, and in the output we can see it's been replaced with the 2 double quotes, and same goes for when you have a comma. So when you have a comma, obviously the double quotes get surrounded, or the content gets surrounded by double quotes, so it's all working fine. And for cases where the text isn't too special, we don't have any double quotes surrounding it. So this is all valid CSV, and it's going to open in just about any CSV viewer. So we can go and just test the maximum column length thing. So we can duplicate a table data cell here, save this and refresh, and now we can see here we get the extra comma to make up for that 5th column. So it's all working just fine. So now we can basically make a call to the exporter and actually download the CSV file. So to do this, we're going to be creating a blob, and from there we're going to be getting a reference to the blob, and then we can just download it virtually. We can download it by virtually clicking on an anchor element. So let's get rid of this stuff and make a new constant for the btn export to CSV. I know the whole blob thing sounds a bit complicated, but honestly it's not too complex at all. So I'm going to get a reference to the btn export to CSV button, and from there we can say btn export to CSV.add event listener. When a button gets clicked on, we're going to run this function inside here. So the function is going to do obviously all of that process right there. So let's first create a new exporter. So we can say const exporter equal to a new table CSV exporter. We're going to pass in here the data table, and we're going to include headers by default. We can make a new constant for the CSV output equal to exporter dot convert to CSV. Call this one output, not output. There we are. And we can now create the blob. So a blob is basically just a container for random data. So in this case, we're going to be creating a blob of CSV. So we can say here const CSV blob is equal to a new blob, and the blob constructor takes in an array. So we can pass in here an array and pass in CSV output as the only element inside the array. And as the second argument here, we can say type is text.csv. So basically we're creating a blob. It's a container of data for the CSV output, and as a type of text/CSV. So from there we can get a reference to the actual blob. So we can say const blob URL is equal to URL.create object URL, and this will accept a blob. So we can say CSV blob. So basically what's happening here is the return value of this is basically this right here. If I press export to CSV, it's this right here. So a blob at this address. So it's like a little internal reference to the blob. And this is actually downloadable by the end user. So with that being said, we can go inside here and simply at the moment we can just console.log the blob URL, save this and refresh the browser. We can press export to CSV, and we get here the blob. So this right here is a reference to the actual blob containing the contents, and it is downloadable by the client's web browser. So with that being said, we can now create a new anchor element and have the href set to the blob, and that is then downloadable. So I can go back inside here, make a new constant, call this one anchor element, equal to document.create element. You're going to put inside here a. Okay, so of course, making a new a element. Then we can simply say anchor elements dot href is equal to the blob URL. Alrighty, we can say anchor element dot download. So the download attribute is basically the name of the file that the user will be downloading. If you don't add the download attribute, then they're going to be downloading a file called 16E294, etc. So to prevent them from downloading this random string of characters, you set the download attribute to be something readable, such as table export.csv. Alrighty, cool. And then we can simply say element.click. So calling the click method on this element is basically going to virtually click on the hidden anchor element. The last thing to do here is to say set timeout, and we're going to time out this function right here. We're going to say URL.revoke object URL. We can pass in here the blob URL. So the revoke object URL is going to be telling the browser to forget about the reference to the blob. If you don't do this, you may be increasing memory usage, so just do this to reduce the amount of memory being used by the browser. And we can say 500 right here. And the reason why this is inside a set timeout is because on Microsoft Edge, I've found that if I don't use a timeout, then the file download won't actually start. So to ensure the download to work on Microsoft Edge, ensure you have the timeout right there. So I can save this and refresh the browser, and we have here our final result. If I was to refresh this, press export to CSV, and we get here the CSV output working just fine. Alright, and I can also just go inside here and I can say false to the include headers argument, save this and refresh, press export, and now we get the output without the header row. And that is how you can export an HTML table to a CSV file using plain JavaScript. Any questions, please leave a comment asking. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you later.